The rain hammered against the window like it was trying to break in, mirroring the storm raging inside Elias Thorne as he stood frozen in the doorway of their cramped Seattle apartment. Wyatt Harlan, his roommate of 3 years and the man he'd silently loved for longer than he cared to admit, lay sprawled on the couch, oblivious in his sleep, a half-empty beer bottle dangling from his fingers. In that moment, as thunder cracked overhead, Elias realized with a gut-wrenching clarity that loving Wyatt wasn't just a secret. It was a cage, one built from the sharp edges of the man's unyielding beliefs, and tonight, that cage was starting to crack. Elias had always known it would end like this, in the quiet hours after a bar fight that neither of them had seen coming. Wyatt's knuckles were still raw from the punch he'd thrown at some guy who dared to call him out on his slurs, the kind of casual venom that slipped from Wyatt's lips like it was nothing, like it didn't carve invisible wounds into everyone around him. Elias backed away slowly, his heart pounding not from fear of the storm outside, but from the one brewing in his chest. The unspoken truth that had festered for years, threatening to spill out and destroy the fragile life they'd built together in this rain-soaked city. Seattle had a way of amplifying secrets, its perpetual gray skies pressing down on you until every hidden ache felt like it might burst through the clouds. Elias Thorne had come here 5 years ago, fresh out of a dead-end job in Portland, chasing the vague promise of reinvention in the Emerald City. At 23, he'd been all wide-eyed optimism, convinced that a new zip code could rewrite his story. Instead, it had handed him Wyatt Harlan, a transplant from the dusty plains of West Texas, who answered Elias's Craigslist ad for a roommate with a pickup truck full of flannel shirts and a grin that could disarm a room. They were opposites in every way that mattered. Elias, the quiet graphic designer with a sketchbook full of half-drawn dreams. Wyatt, the rough-around-the-edges mechanic whose hands were perpetually stained with grease and whose laugh could fill the apartment like summer thunder. From the start, it had been easy to fall into rhythm with him. Mornings began with the sizzle of bacon on the stove, Wyatt flipping strips with a spatula while blasting classic rock from his battered Bluetooth speaker. Elias would shuffle in, bleary-eyed from late nights hunched over his laptop, and Wyatt would slide a plate across the counter without a word, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Eat up, city boy," he'd say, his Texas drawl wrapping around the words like warm leather. "Can't have you wasting away on that kale crap you call food." Elias would laugh, the sound light and genuine, because in those moments, Wyatt wasn't the guy from the garage who muttered under his breath about those types invading the neighborhood. He was just Wyatt, solid, uncomplicated, the kind of man who fixed leaky faucets at midnight and left voicemails reminding Elias to lock the door. But Elias knew better than to let the illusion linger too long. He was gay, had been since he could remember, though it had taken him until college to say it out loud without his voice cracking. In Seattle, a city that prided itself on rainbows and progressive pride flags fluttering from every coffee shop, coming out felt less like a declaration and more like slipping into a well-worn jacket. Dates came and went, baristas with ironic tattoos, tech bros who talked too fast about algorithms, but none of them stuck. None of them lit that quiet fire in his chest the way Wyatt did, with his easy sprawl on the couch during game nights, feet kicked up on the coffee table, yelling at the Seahawks like his life depended on it. Elias had tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to proximity, to the loneliness of shared walls and late-night confessions over cheap whiskey. But by the end of their first year, when Wyatt had crashed on the floor of Elias's old place after a brutal breakup with his high school sweetheart back in Lubbock, the lines had blurred beyond repair. Wyatt had shown up at the door past midnight, eyes red-rimmed, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder like he'd finally admitted defeat to the ghosts of his past. "She said I was too much," he'd slurred, collapsing onto the rug with a bottle of Jack Daniels clutched to his chest. "Too rough, too damn stubborn. What the hell does that even mean?" Elias had knelt beside him, heart twisting, and listened as Wyatt poured out the wreckage of a love built on small-town expectations and unspoken resentments. That night, as Wyatt's head lolled against Elias's shoulder, his breath warm and ragged, Elias had felt the shift, like a fault line cracking beneath the city streets. He wanted to pull Wyatt closer, to trace the stubble along his jaw and whisper that he wasn't too much, that he was everything. But instead, he'd helped him to the couch, tucked a blanket over his broad frame, and retreated to his room, where he lay awake until dawn, fists clenched in the sheets. Loving Wyatt wasn't just risky, it was impossible. Because beneath the charm and the camaraderie lurked the shadow Elias had glimpsed too many times. The offhand jokes about fairies at the bar, the way Wyatt's jaw tightened when a couple of guys held hands on the street, his voice dropping to a mutter about how it ain't natural. It wasn't hatred, not exactly. Wyatt had grown up in a world where men like Elias were punchlines, where church sermons on Sundays drilled in the fear of anything that strayed from the script. His father, a rancher with hands like weathered oak, had raised him on stories of hard work and harder lines. Love was between a man and a woman, end of story. No room for gray areas in the red dust of Texas. Wyatt carried that baggage like an invisible tattoo, etched deep enough that it bled into every conversation, every sideways glance. Elias had seen it flare up once, early on, when they'd wandered into a pride event in Capitol Hill by accident. The streets were alive with color. Drag queens in glittering heels, floats blasting pop anthems, couples kissing under strings of fairy lights. Wyatt had frozen, his beer halfway to his lips, eyes narrowing as if the whole scene was a personal affront. "This ain't right," he'd said, voice low and edged with something brittle. "Folks pushing their agenda like it's normal. Makes me sick." Elias had swallowed the hurt, forced a nod, and steered them toward a quieter bar, but the words had lodged in his throat like shards of glass. Still, he stayed, because in the quiet moments, when the world outside faded to a drizzle against the panes, Wyatt was different. He'd slump into the kitchen after a 12-hour shift at the auto shop, shoulders slumped under the weight of oil changes and customer complaints, and Elias would brew coffee strong enough to wake the dead. They'd sit at the scarred oak table, steam curling between them, and Wyatt would talk. Not about the surface stuff, but the undercurrents. About his ma, who baked pecan pies that could mend a broken heart, and how she'd passed too young from cancer, leaving him adrift in a sea of condolences. About the brother he'd lost to the military, shipped off to some desert half a world away, and never quite the same when he came back, haunted by ghosts Elias could only imagine. In those confessions, Wyatt's guard slipped, revealing a vulnerability that made Elias's chest ache with a tenderness he couldn't name. One evening, as autumn leaves plastered the sidewalks outside their apartment in the Fremont neighborhood, Wyatt had leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming the mug's rim. "You ever feel like you're just going through the motions, Eli?" he'd asked, using the nickname that always sent a secret thrill through Elias. "Like life's this big machine, and you're just a cog spinning away but not really move in?" Elias had paused, fork midway to his mouth from a plate of Wyatt's improvised chili. Too spicy, too perfect. "All the time," he'd admitted, voice steady despite the lie it skirted. Because for him, the machine ground to a halt every time Wyatt's knee brushed his under the table, every time their eyes locked a beat too long over a shared laugh. That night, after Wyatt had stumbled to bed, Elias pulled out his sketchbook, the one hidden under his mattress like a guilty secret. He drew Wyatt from memory. The strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled damp at the nape after a shower, the faint scar above his eyebrow from a childhood fall off a horse. The pencil strokes were feverish, each one a confession he couldn't voice. He loved the way Wyatt filled a room, not with bluster, but with a quiet gravity that pulled everything toward him. He loved the calluses on his palms, rough from wrenches and hard labor, and the way he'd hum old country tunes while fixing the toaster. But most of all, he loved the glimpses of softness, the rare smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, the hand on Elias's shoulder after a bad day at work, steady and reassuring. Yet, as the weeks blurred into months, the weight of it all grew heavier. Elias dated sporadically, swiping through apps with half-hearted interest, meeting guys at dimly lit bars in Belltown who smelled of cologne and fleeting promises. There was Jensen, the barista with a lip ring and stories about backpacking Europe. They made out in an alley once, rain slicking their skin, but Elias's mind wandered to Wyatt's laugh echoing from the apartment above. Then came Marcus, a lawyer with a sleek condo overlooking the Sound, who talked about commitment like it was a contract to be negotiated. Elias ghosted him after 2 dinners, the guilt twisting like a knife because he knew he was sabotaging every chance at something real, all to preserve the illusion of what he couldn't have. Wyatt noticed, of course. He always did, in that perceptive way that made Elias's pulse stutter. "You seein' someone?" he'd ask over breakfast, eyes flicking up from his phone with casual curiosity. Elias would shrug, mutter something about keeping things light, and Wyatt would nod, a shadow crossing his face that Elias pretended not to see. Once, after Elias came home late from a date, reeking of gin and regret, Wyatt had been waiting up, feet propped on the coffee table, a frown etching lines between his brows. That guy again? The one with the fancy car? Elias had collapsed onto the armchair, head throbbing. "Doesn't matter. It's nothing." Wyatt's gaze lingered, intense and unreadable. "You deserve better than nothing, Eli. Don't sell yourself short." The words hung in the air, laced with an undercurrent Elias couldn't decipher. Was it concern, or something deeper, mirroring his own buried longing? As winter crept in, blanketing Seattle in a chill that seeped through the cracks in the walls, the tension simmered beneath their routine. Christmas approached, the city aglow with lights strung across Pike Place, the air thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts and pine. Wyatt dragged home a scraggly tree from a lot in Ballard, needles shedding like confetti, and they decorated it together in a haze of eggnog and Bing Crosby crooning from the speakers. Elias hung the ornaments. Glass baubles from his childhood, a wooden star Wyatt had carved himself, and for a moment, it felt like home, like the kind of life he'd only dared to dream about in stolen sketches. Wyatt's arm brushed his as they reached for the same tinsel, and time slowed, the world narrowing to the warmth of that contact, the faint scent of pine and motor oil clinging to Wyatt's skin. But the illusion shattered on New Year's Eve, when the clock struck 12 and Wyatt pulled Elias into a bear hug, his embrace fierce and fleeting. "Happy New Year, partner," he murmured, voice rough with emotion. Elias clung a second too long, heart slamming against his ribs, before Wyatt pulled away, oblivious, clinking glasses with a grin. In the days that followed, Elias buried himself in work, deadlines piling up like snowdrifts, but the what-ifs gnawed at him relentlessly. What if he told Wyatt? What if, against all odds, the man who'd built walls around his heart let one crack for him? Little did Elias know the crack was already forming, not from his confession, but from the unearthing of Wyatt's own buried truths, truths that would force them both to confront the chasm between who they were and who they pretended to be. Wyatt Harlan had never been one for introspection. Life was too damn short for navel-gazing when there were engines to rebuild and beers to crack open at the end of a shift. But lately, as the rain turned the streets of Seattle into mirrors reflecting his own fractured image, he found his mind wandering to places he didn't recognize. Dark corners where doubts whispered like the wind through the pines back home. Elias was at the heart of it, that much he couldn't deny. The guy was his anchor in this soggy excuse for a city, the one constant in a sea of transplants and tech weirdos. Wyatt owed him for more than half the rent. Elias had pulled him back from the edge more times than he could count, with his steady hazel eyes and that quiet way of listening that made Wyatt feel seen, not judged. It started small, these intrusions into Wyatt's carefully guarded world. A lingering glance in the rearview mirror as Elias sketched at the kitchen table, pencil flying across the page with a focus Wyatt envied. Or the way Elias's laugh bubbled up during their ritual Friday night takeout. Sushi for him, ribs for Wyatt, turning the mundane into something almost magical. Wyatt told himself it was brotherly affection, the kind forged in shared hardships like the time their power went out during a freak ice storm and they'd huddled under blankets, trading stories until dawn. But deep down, in the quiet hours when sleep evaded him, Wyatt knew it ran deeper, a current pulling at him that he didn't dare name. His past was a noose around his neck, tightening with every memory of Lubbock summers, where the horizon stretched flat and unforgiving, and love was as straightforward as a barbed wire fence. Pa had been a man of few words, his lessons delivered in grunts and gestures. Fix what's broke, stand tall, and don't let the world soften you. Ma had tempered it with her gentle hymns and hugs that smelled of lavender soap. But even she had drawn lines. Fags were sinners, plain and simple, a topic hushed in church pews but thrummed in the veins of every boy Wyatt ran with. He'd parroted it all, tossing around slurs like firecrackers on the 4th, laughing to mask the unease that flickered when he'd catch himself staring too long at a teammate in the locker room showers, water sluicing over taut muscles. College had been his escape hatch, a partial scholarship to Texas Tech hauling him to Lubbock proper, where he majored in auto tech and minored in denial. That's where he'd met Callie, his high school flame reignited over keg stands and tailgates. She was all golden curls and sundresses, the girl who made sense in his father's world. Feminine, pliant, a future etched in white lace and picket fences. They married young, Wyatt 22 and cocky, convinced he'd cracked the code to normalcy. But the cracks showed fast. Nights when he'd lie awake beside her, body rigid, mind replaying fragments of a dream he couldn't voice. Callie sensed it, her touches turning tentative, until one humid afternoon she sat him down on their sagging porch swing and said, "Wyatt, honey, I think you need to figure out who you are without me." The divorce was quiet, a mutual unraveling, but it left him hollowed out, drifting west to Seattle like a tumbleweed chasing rain. Elias had been the first real tether. No pity in his eyes when Wyatt showed up broken at that Craigslist listing. Just a firm handshake and an offer of the spare room in his cozy Fremont walk-up. Over time, Wyatt had let him in, piece by jagged piece. The ache of losing Jake, his little brother, to an IED in Kandahar. The guilt over not visiting Ma's grave more often. The fear that he'd inherited Pa's iron-fisted bigotry, passing it down like a curse. Elias never pushed, just absorbed it all with that patient nod. His presence a balm Wyatt didn't know he craved. Lately, though, the balm felt like fire. Wyatt caught himself watching Elias more. How his fingers flexed around a coffee mug, veins standing out like rivers on a map. The curve of his neck when he tilted his head in thought, exposed and trusting. It stirred something primal, a heat low in Wyatt's gut that he drowned with extra shifts at Harlan's Auto, burying himself in the guts of transmissions until his hands bled. "Get your head out of the clouds, Harlan," he'd mutter to himself, wiping sweat from his brow. But the clouds followed him home, thickening with each passing day. The bar fight was the spark that ignited it all. O'Malley's was their haunt. A dive-in Ballard with sticky floors and a jukebox stocked with Springsteen and Seeger. It was trivia night, the kind where Wyatt dominated with his encyclopedic knowledge of 80s muscle cars and Elias filled in the gaps with obscure indie bands. They were 3 pints in, buzzed and buoyant, when the team at the next table, 2 guys mid-30s, all flannel and close-cropped beards, leaned over with a question about Fleetwood Mac. Elias lit up, rattling off lyrics with a grin that made Wyatt's chest tighten, and before he knew it, the bearded one was sliding a chair closer, his hand brushing Elias's arm in a way that screamed interest. Wyatt's vision tunneled. "Back off, pal," he growled, louder than intended, the words slurring into territory he couldn't recall. The guy, Ryan, his name turned out to be, turned, eyebrow arched. "Excuse me?" Wyatt doubled down, the beer fueling a rage he didn't understand. "You heard me. Hands off my friend. We don't need your kind pawing around." The slur hung unspoken but heavy, the air thickening like before a storm. Ryan's partner stood, face flushing. "Your kind? What's that supposed to mean, cowboy?" It escalated fast shouts. A shoved table, Wyatt's fist connecting with Ryan's jaw in a crack that echoed like gunfire. Elias was on his feet in an instant, hauling Wyatt back by the collar, his voice sharp in Wyatt's ear. "Enough, Wyatt. We're leaving. Now." Outside, the rain had picked up, sheeting down in cold fury as Elias dragged him 2 blocks to the apartment, Wyatt stumbling, the adrenaline crash leaving him shaky and sick. He collapsed onto the couch, the room spinning, while Elias paced, hands raking through his wet hair. "What the hell was that?" Elias demanded, voice cracking with something raw. Anger, hurt, Wyatt couldn't tell. You can't say shit like that, Wyatt. Not anymore." Wyatt's head throbbed, but it was Elias's tone that pierced him, laced with a pain that went beyond the brawl. "They were all over you," he muttered, defensive, avoiding those hazel eyes that now stormed like the sky outside. "Flirtin' like it was nothin'. Made my skin crawl." Elias stopped pacing, his laugh bitter and hollow. "Your skin? What about mine, Wyatt? What about every time you drop one of your jokes? And it feels like a knife." The words landed like blows, stripping Wyatt bare. He sat up, confusion warring with defensiveness. "Eli, I'm just looking out for you. That's what bros do." Elias's face crumpled, just for a second, before he turned away, shoulders rigid. "Yeah, brothers." He grabbed his jacket, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that echoed in Wyatt's bones. Alone in the dim living room, thunder rumbling distant threats, Wyatt pressed his palms to his eyes, the raw knuckles pulsing in time with his regret. What had he done? The question looped, endless, as the rain wept against the glass. He didn't sleep that night, replaying the scene, the flash of hurt in Elias's eyes, the way Ryan's partner had shielded him, their bond unapologetic and fierce. It gnawed at Wyatt, stirring memories he'd buried deep. Jake, before the war, confiding in a late-night phone call about a buddy overseas, the one who'd kissed him under the stars and changed everything. "It's confusing, W.I., Jake had said, voice small. "But it feels right." Wyatt had laughed it off then, called him confused, but the call had ended with silence that stretched across miles. Jake never spoke of it again, and 2 years later he was gone, his dog tags cold in Wyatt's palm at the funeral. Dawn crept in gray and unforgiving, Elias's door still closed when Wyatt finally dragged himself to the kitchen. He brewed coffee on autopilot, the machine gurgling like his gut, and when Elias emerged, hair tousled, eyes shadowed, Wyatt slid a mug across the counter without a word. "Sorry," he said, the word rough as gravel. "About last night. I was out of line." Elias paused, fingers wrapping around the ceramic, his gaze unreadable. "Yeah, you were." No absolution, just that simple truth, hanging between them like fog. The days that followed were a tightrope walk, polite but strained, their routine fractured. Wyatt threw himself into work, volunteering for overtime, coming home to an empty apartment where Elias's sketches lay abandoned on the table. He found one once, half hidden under a magazine. A portrait of himself, captured mid-laugh, eyes crinkled with a joy Wyatt barely recognized. It stole his breath, the detail, the faint stubble, the way his dimple deepened, speaking of an intimacy that terrified him. He tucked it away, heart racing, and pretended not to notice how Elias flinched at his touch now, casual brushes avoided like live wires. Spring teased at the edges of winter, cherry blossoms unfurling along the waterfront, but Wyatt felt only the chill of distance. He started running, pounding the paths around Green Lake at dawn, lungs burning as he outran the questions piling up inside. Was it jealousy that had ignited the fight? Not disgust? The thought slithered in, insidious, forcing him to confront the mirror each morning. The man staring back, broad-shouldered and haunted, wondering if the walls he'd built were keeping others out or himself in. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, Wyatt found Elias on the fire escape, cigarette in hand, a habit Wyatt thought he'd quit. The city hummed below, ferries cutting wakes on the sound, and Wyatt leaned against the railing, searching for words. "I been thinkin'," he started, voice low, "about what you said, about the knife." Elias exhaled smoke, slow and deliberate, his profile sharp against the twilight. "And," Wyatt swallowed, the admission sticking, "I don't want to be that guy, Eli, the one who cuts." Elias turned then, eyes searching, and for a heartbeat, Wyatt thought he saw hope flicker. "Then don't be," Elias whispered, the words a bridge or a breaking point. Wyatt couldn't tell which. But the bridge trembled under the weight of what came next. Elias's phone buzzing with a text from an ex, plans for a date that twisted something vicious in Wyatt's chest. He excused himself, retreating to his room, where the sketch burned a hole in his drawer, whispering truths he wasn't ready to hear. The distance between them wasn't worlds apart, not yet, but it was widening, one unspoken fear at a time, and Wyatt wondered if he'd have the courage to cross it before it swallowed them whole. Elias had always believed that love was a quiet thief, stealing pieces of you in the dead of night until there was nothing left but echoes. But as spring bloomed defiant against Seattle's lingering chill, he felt it more like a storm, relentless, uprooting everything in its path. The bar fight had been the catalyst, ripping open wounds he'd bandaged with denial, forcing him to confront the fragility of their shared life. Wyatt's apology had been a bandage of its own, tentative and thin, but it couldn't staunch the bleed of resentment building in Elias's veins. He loved Wyatt too fiercely for half-measures, and the half-measures were all they had. Work became his refuge. The design studio in Pioneer Square, a hive of creativity where deadlines drowned out the ache. His latest project, a branding overhaul for a queer-owned bookstore in Capitol Hill, immersed him in a world that felt safe, vibrant, unapologetic. Late nights blurred into early mornings, surrounded by mood boards splashed with rainbow gradients and typefaces that evoked handwritten love letters. His boss, Lena, a sharp-witted dyke in her 40s with a buzz cut and a laugh like gravel, noticed the shadows under his eyes. "Spill it, Thorne," she said one afternoon, sliding a latte across her desk cluttered with vinyl records and dog-eared zines. "You're sketching like your heart's on fire, but your face says funeral." Elias hesitated, the confession hovering like mist off the bay. "Roommate troubles," he finally muttered, tracing the rim of his cup. Lena arched a brow, leaning back in her chair with the wisdom of someone who'd navigated her own share of closets and heartbreaks. "The hot mechanic one? Yeah. I remember you mooning over him at the holiday party." Heat flooded Elias's cheeks, but Lena waved it off. "Listen, kid, love's not a solo sport. If he's dragging you down, cut the cord. You've got options." Options. The word echoed as Elias walked home that evening, the market stalls winding down, fishmongers calling last sales under strings of Edison bulbs. Options like Devin, the ex who'd texted out of the blue, his message a casual coffee? Miss your sketches that hid layers of history. They'd dated a year ago, a whirlwind of gallery openings and weekend getaways to the San Juans. But it had fizzled when Devin's wanderlust pulled him to Portland for a mural commission. Now, back in Seattle for good, he was all easy smiles and lingering touches over lattes at Le Panier, the patisserie's buttery croissants crumbling like Elias's resolve. "You've changed," Devin said, his dark eyes, framed by lashes that caught the light like ink on vellum, searching Elias's face. "Happier, somehow. Or is it sadder?" Elias laughed it off, but the truth clawed at him. Sadder, because every laugh with Devin felt like a betrayal, a rehearsal for the life he wished he could build with Wyatt. Wyatt, meanwhile, was a ghost in their apartment, his presence marked by the clatter of tools in the living room and the faint scent of WD-40 lingering on the couch. He ran more now, lacing up his Nikes at odd hours, returning flushed and distant, sweat beading on his forehead like dew. Elias watched from the sidelines, sketching him in stolen moments. Wyatt mid-stride, muscles coiled under his tank, face set in determination that bordered on desperation. The drawings piled up, a secret archive of longing, each line a plea for the man to see him, to see them. The breaking point came on a Saturday in May, when the sun dared to pierce the clouds, bathing Fremont in a rare golden haze. Elias had planned to escape to Discovery Park, sketchpad in tow, but Wyatt cornered him in the kitchen, arms crossed over his chest like a barrier. "We need to talk," he said, voice steady but eyes stormy, the green flecks in his irises sharpened by whatever war raged inside. Elias's stomach dropped, visions of eviction notices and shattered routines flashing like lightning. "About what?" he asked, feigning nonchalance as he poured cereal, the flakes rattling like bones. About us. About everything. Wyatt rubbed the back of his neck, a telltale sign of discomfort, his biceps flexing under the faded Henley that clung to his frame. That fight. The things I said. I've been reading up books from the library, online stuff. Trying to understand. Elias froze, spoon midway to his mouth, milk dripping forgotten. Understand? The word was foreign on Wyatt's tongue, laced with effort that twisted something tender in Elias's chest. And? He prompted, voice barely above a whisper, afraid to shatter the moment. Wyatt exhaled, leaning against the counter, close enough that Elias could smell the soap on his skin. Irish Spring, clean and unpretentious. It's hard, Eli. Growing up where I did, it's like they wired me wrong. Pa always said. He trailed off, jaw clenching. But seeing you hurt? That don't sit right. I don't want to be the reason you look like you're carrying the world. The admission hung, vulnerable and raw, and Elias's heart stuttered, hope blooming fragile as the tulips outside. Wyatt, But Wyatt cut him off, stepping closer, his hand hovering near Elias's arm before dropping away. Just give me time to fix this, to be better. Time. Elias nodded, throat tight, because time was the one thing he could give, even as it eroded him from the inside. They spent the afternoon in tentative truce, wandering the Fremont Sunday market, stalls bursting with handmade soaps and street food aromas, falafel and pho mingling in the air. Wyatt bought them empanadas from a vendor with a booming laugh, and they ate on a bench overlooking the canal, the water sluggish and reflective. Conversation flowed easier, skirting the edges. Wyatt's latest project at the shop, a vintage Mustang resurrection. Elias's bookstore gig, the pride he felt in crafting its logo, a stylized open book with pages unfurling into a spectrum arc. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows, Wyatt's knee pressed against Elias's, a contact that lingered, electric. This city's growing on me, Wyatt admitted, gaze on the horizon where the Space Needle pierced the sky like a needle threading clouds. Because of you, mostly. Elias's breath caught, the words a spark to dry tinder. He wanted to lean in, to bridge the inches with a kiss that said everything words couldn't, but fear held him back. The ghost of Wyatt's old slurs, the uncertainty of this new, untested ground. That night, Devin texted again. Dinner? Elias stared at the screen, thumb hovering, before typing a yes. Guilt gnawed as he dressed, splashing cologne over the scent of empanadas still clinging to his skin. Wyatt was in the living room, flipping channels, but his eyes tracked Elias's exit, a flicker of something, hurt, crossing his face. Have fun, he called, voice neutral, but Elias heard the undercurrent, the plea unspoken. Dinner was at a gastropub in Queen and Devin animated over oysters and craft IPAs, his hand covering Elias's across the table in a gesture that felt rehearsed. I've missed this, Devin said, leaning in, lips brushing Elias's ear. But Elias's mind was elsewhere, replaying Wyatt's confession, the tentative bridge they'd built. He ended the night with a chaste kiss on Devin's cheek, hailing a cab before things escalated, the city's lights blurring into streaks of regret. Back home, the apartment was dark, Wyatt's door ajar, a sliver of light spilling like an invitation. Elias paused, heart hammering, tempted to knock, to spill it all, the date, the doubt, the love that consumed him. But the door stayed shut, and he retreated to his room, where sleep came fitful, dreams tangled with Wyatt's touch and Devin's smile. The next morning, Wyatt was gone before Elias woke, a note on the counter. Out for a run. Coffee's hot. Simple words, but they carried weight, a continuation of the fragile dialogue. Elias sipped the brew, strong and black the way Wyatt liked it, and wondered how long they could dance on this knife's edge before one of them fell. Little did he know, the fall was coming. Not from his lips, but from a discovery that would unearth Wyatt's deepest secret, forcing the truth into the light and testing the bonds they'd only just begun to mend. Wyatt had always prided himself on being a fixer. Cars, faucets, the occasional shattered ego at the shop, but mending himself felt like wrestling a ghost, elusive and twice as mean. The library books piled on his nightstand like accusations. Titles on allyship and identity, dog-eared pages marked with highlighter streaks that glowed under his bedside lamp. He read them in stolen moments, during lunch breaks wedged between oil drums, the words burrowing under his skin like rust. Homosexuality is not a choice, one passage declared, blunt as a wrench to the gut. Wyatt slammed the book shut, heart pounding, because if it wasn't a choice, then what the hell explained the coil of heat in his belly when Elias smiled just so? He threw himself into the Mustang Project, a 67 fastback owned by a tech exec who wanted it cherry for his weekend cruises. The garage smelled of solvent and steel, a sanctuary where Wyatt could lose himself in torque specs and timing chains. His boss, Mick, a grizzled vet with a prosthetic leg and zero tolerance for bullshit, clapped him on the back one afternoon. "You're burnin' the candle at both ends, Harlan. That roommate of yours got you twisted," Wyatt grunted, wiping grease from his hands on a rag that was more stain than cloth. "Something like that," Mick chuckled, low and knowing. "Seattle'll do that. Peels back the layers till you're raw. Just don't let it bury you." Raw. That's how Wyatt felt driving home that evening. The radio tuned to a classic rock station crooning Mellencamp about small-town boys chasing big dreams. He pulled into their spot behind the building, the apartment's glow a beacon in the twilight, and something shifted. A prickle at the base of his neck, like the air before a twister. The door was unlocked, Elias's habit when he worked late, but inside, the living room was dim, the only light from Wyatt's cracked bedroom door. He stepped inside, keys jangling, and froze. Elias was there, perched on the edge of Wyatt's bed, the sketchbook open in his lap, the one Wyatt had hidden, the one with the portrait that stared back like a mirror to his soul. Elias's face was pale, eyes wide with shock, the pencil still clutched in his fingers like a lifeline. "Wyatt?" he breathed, scrambling to close it, but the damage was done. The intimacy of those lines exposed, raw as an open wound. "What the fuck?" Wyatt's voice came out sharper than intended, a reflex born of panic, his pulse thundering in his ears. He crossed the room in 2 strides, snatching the book, flipping through pages that chronicled him in ways no one should see. Asleep on the couch, head tipped back in laughter, shirtless after a run, sweat tracing paths down his chest. Each image screamed possession, desire, the kind Wyatt had glimpsed in his own dreams but never dared acknowledge. "This yours?" he demanded, though he knew, the style unmistakable, Elias's fluid strokes, capturing light and shadow with heartbreaking precision. Elias stood, backing toward the door, his hazel eyes stormy with a mix of defiance and dread. "Yes, and you weren't supposed to find it." The admission hung electric, the air thick with the unsaid. Wyatt's chest heaved, anger warring with a deeper turmoil, the realization that Elias's gaze had lingered not in brotherhood, but in hunger. It should have repulsed him, slotted neatly into the box of unnatural his pa had built, but instead, it ignited something feral, a recognition that echoed his own buried cravings. "You've been, what, watching me? Drawing me like some kinda..." Wyatt cut off, the word fag, rising unbidden, bitter on his tongue. He swallowed it down, the book's lessons flashing like warnings. Elias's face hardened, chin lifting in that stubborn way that always made Wyatt's protectiveness surge. "Like I love you," Elias said, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "That's what this is, Wyatt. I've loved you for years. Every laugh, every late night, every goddamn time you act like the world's black and white and I'm the gray you can't stomach." The room tilted, Wyatt gripping the bedpost to steady himself, the sketchbook crumpling in his fist. "Love." The word landed like a confession in a confessional, absolving and damning in equal measure. He wanted to bolt, to drown it in a 6-pack at O'Malley's, but his feet rooted, eyes locked on Elias's, the vulnerability there, the plea for understanding that mirrored his own midnight wrestlings. "Eli, this ain't." He faltered, the Texas drawl thickening with emotion. I ain't like that. Or maybe I am. And that's what scares the shit out of me. Elias's breath hitched, a step forward closing the gap, close enough that Wyatt could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the faint scar on his lip from a biking accident 2 summers back. Then let me in, Elias whispered, hand reaching tentative, brushing Wyatt's arm. The touch was fire, searing through flannel and flesh, awakening nerves Wyatt had numbed for years. He didn't pull away, couldn't, and when Elias's fingers traced up to his jaw, thumb grazing stubble, Wyatt leaned into it, a shudder rippling through him like the first rain after drought. The kiss was inevitable, a collision born of pent-up storms. Elias closed the distance, lips soft but insistent, tasting of mint and desperation. Wyatt froze for a heartbeat, mind screaming warnings. Pa's voice thundering damnation, Jake's ghost whispering approval. Before instinct overrode, his hands fisting in Elias's shirt, pulling him closer. It was messy, urgent, teeth clashing in the haste. But beneath the frenzy lay a tenderness that undid Wyatt, Elias's sigh vibrating against his mouth like a prayer answered. They broke apart gasping, foreheads pressed, the world reduced to the ragged sink of their breaths. Wyatt, Elias murmured, voice wrecked, fingers threading through Wyatt's hair. But reality crashed in, cold as Puget Sound fog, Wyatt's heart slamming not just with want, but with the terror of what it meant. He jerked back, the sketchbook tumbling to the floor, pages splaying like fallen leaves. We can't. The words tasted like ash, but they spilled out, fueled by the old fears clawing for purchase. Elias recoiled as if slapped, eyes darkening with hurt that carved deeper than any slur. Can't, or won't, because this. He gestured between them, voice rising. This is us, Wyatt, not some phase, not a mistake. But if you're too scared to face it, then maybe I am too. He turned, shoulders slumped, and Wyatt watched him go, the door to Elias's room clicking shut like a verdict. Alone, Wyatt sank onto the bed, head in hands, the sketches mocking him from the carpet. He'd crossed a line, tasted the forbidden fruit, and now the garden felt poisoned. Sleep evaded him that night, the kiss replaying in loops, Elias's warmth, the rightness of it that terrified him most. Dawn found him staring at the ceiling, resolve hardening. He had to end this, for both their sakes, before it destroyed them. But ending it meant more than distance. It meant betrayal, a secret unearthed that would shatter Elias's trust and force Wyatt to choose between the man he loved and the lie he'd lived for too long. As the sun crested the Olympics, gilding the bay in reluctant gold, Wyatt rose, steeling himself for the confrontation that would either save them or break them irreparably. The betrayal came not with a bang, but a whisper, a voicemail left in the dead of night, discovered by Elias in the harsh light of morning. He'd woken to the echo of the kiss still tingling on his lips, hope a fragile bloom in his chest despite Wyatt's retreat. The apartment hummed with possibility, coffee brewing on timer, the faint scent of rain-washed streets drifting through the cracked window. But as Elias scrolled his phone over toast, Devon's name flashed. Missed call, 2:17 a.m. The message icon blinked, innocuous, and he tapped play, expecting apologies for a canceled plan or drunken ramblings from a gallery afterparty. Wyatt's voice filled the kitchen, rough with sleep and something darker. Panic, maybe, or resolve. Devon, it's Wyatt. Harlan. Look, I know this is out of left field, but I need you to do something for me. Stay away from Elias. He's going through some shit, and you coming around? It ain't helpin'. He's better off without the games. Just back off, all right? For his sake. The line went dead, static hissing like a serpent, and Elias's world tilted, the phone slipping from numb fingers to clatter on the tile. Betrayal. The word tasted metallic, sharp as the butter knife beside his plate. Wyatt, his Wyatt, the man who'd kissed him like drowning, who'd confessed fears in the half-light, had gone behind his back, meddling with the one thread of normalcy Elias had clung to. Rage boiled up, hot and unbidden, chasing the hurt that clawed deeper, drawing blood. He stormed to Wyatt's door, pounding with a fist that didn't feel like his own. "Wake up! We need to talk. Now." Wyatt emerged bleary-eyed, hair mussed, wearing nothing but boxers that hung low on his hips, the sight twisting the knife further because even now, Elias wanted him. "Eli? What's—" The question died as Elias thrust the phone under his nose, the voicemail cued and playing, Wyatt's own words damning him in tinny echo. Color drained from his face, guilt etching lines around his mouth. "Shit. I didn't mean for you to hear it like that." "Like what? Like you think you get to play gatekeeper for my life?" Elias's voice cracked, volume rising to match the storm building outside, thunder grumbling distant threats. "You kiss me, finally, and then what? Sabotage the one guy who actually wants me without all the baggage? Who the hell do you think you are, Wyatt?" He paced the narrow hall, hands fisting in his hair, the walls closing in like the apartment had shrunk overnight. Wyatt stepped forward, hands raised placating, but Elias flinched back, the motion a wall thicker than any slur. "I panicked, all right? After last night. It was too much. You, me, that kiss, it felt right, but wrong too, like I'm betraying everything I was raised to be. And seeing you with him, Devin, it gutted me, Eli. I couldn't watch you slip away to someone who ain't." He trailed off, the unfinished sentence a chasm. "Who ain't what? Me?" Elias spat, tears pricking hot. "Because I'm the freak who loves you? The one you can toy with but never commit to? No. God, no." Wyatt's voice broke, raw as an exposed wire, and he closed the gap, gripping Elias's shoulders, thumbs pressing divots into cotton. "It's me, Eli. I'm the freak. The one who's been lying to himself for years." The confession spilled then, torrent fast. Jake's secret, the locker room glances, the dreams that woke him sweating and ashamed. "I called Devin 'cause I was scared. Scared you'd see how messed up I am and run. But pushing you away? That's worse. I can't. I don't want to lose you." Elias searched his face, the sincerity there warring with the fresh wound of betrayal. Wyatt's eyes, blue as faded denim, held no deception, just a mirror to his own turmoil. The love they'd both denied now laid bare. "Then stop pushing," Elias whispered, voice softening despite the ache. "Stop fighting this. Us." Wyatt nodded, pulling him into an embrace that was all anchors and apologies, bodies aligning like puzzle pieces long separated. The high came fierce, a reconciliation forged in the kitchen's fluorescent glare. They talked for hours, words tumbling like the rain now sheeting the windows. Wyatt's fears unpacked, Elias's hurts aired until the air cleared lighter. Laughter crept in, tentative. When Wyatt admitted to practicing ally phrases in the mirror, his drawl mangling intersectionality into something comical. Elias traced the scar on Wyatt's brow, fingers lingering, and when their lips met again, it was slower, exploratory, a mapping of territories newly claimed. But peace was fleeting. The storm outside mirrored the one within, and as they tangled on the couch, clothes shedding like old skins, Wyatt's phone buzzed insistent on the coffee table. He ignored it at first, lost in Elias's gasps, the slide of skin that felt like homecoming. But it persisted, vibrating like a hornet, and with a curse, Wyatt snatched it up. Pa's name glowed on the screen, a ghost from Lubbock calling collect. Wyatt's hand stilled on Elias's thigh, tension coiling anew. "Answer it," Elias urged, sitting up, shirt rumpled and eyes concerned. "Whatever it is, face it." Wyatt hit accept, voice gruff. "Pa." Harlan Sr.'s voice crackled through, thick with Texas twang and uncharacteristic urgency. "Boy, you need to come home. It's Jake's girl, Lila. She's in trouble, says the baby's coming early, and she needs family. Real family." The words landed like shrapnel. Jake's girl. Lila. Wyatt had known about her. The brief email from Jake before deployment. A hasty surprise, bro. Gonna be an uncle. But Jake was gone, and Lila had faded into memory, a footnote in grief. Now she was resurfacing, tethering Wyatt to the past with a child. Jake's child, blood of the brother he'd failed. "I'm comin'," he said, the decision automatic, though it meant leaving Elias, this fragile new world, for the dust-choked plains that had shaped him wrong. Elias watched him hang up, face paling as understanding dawned. "Texas." Wyatt nodded, pulling on his jeans with mechanical motions. "Just for a bit. Lila. She don't have nobody else." The lie tasted bitter. It would be more than a bit, the pull of family a gravity well. Elias stood, smoothing his shirt, masking hurt with resolve. "Go. Be there for her. For Jake." But his eyes pleaded, "Don't forget us. Don't let them win." Wyatt left at dawn, the Mustang's engine a low growl as it vanished into the fog-shrouded streets. Elias stood at the window, coffee cooling untouched, the apartment echoing with absence. Days blurred into a limbo of sketches unfinished and texts unanswered. Elias throwing himself into work while doubt whispered insidiously. Was the kiss a fluke? The betrayal a sign of fractures too deep to mend? A week in, Devon's call came, angry, confused. "Your roommate's an asshole," he snapped, no preamble. "Told me to back off like he owns you." "What's the deal, Elias?" Elias explained, haltingly, the pieces falling into place. Wyatt's jealousy, the voicemail a misguided shield. Devon laughed, bitter. Classic closet case. Run while you can. The advice stung, but it lingered, a seed of fear as Elias paced the empty living room, the sketchbook mocking him from the shelf. Wyatt's updates were sporadic. Texts about dusty roads and Lila's swollen ankles. A photo of an ultrasound grainy with promise. "Miss you," one read at midnight. Elias's reply. "Miss you more," sent with fingers trembling, but distance bred shadows, and when Wyatt called finally, voice strained over static, the news hit like thunder. "Pa knows. About us." Lila let it slip. "Overheard me talking to you. He's comin' unglued. Eli. Says I'm dead to him if I don't end it." The line crackled, Elias's world fracturing anew. Wyatt's silence stretched, broken only by a choked sob, the strongest man he knew, unraveling. "I love you," Wyatt whispered, the words a lifeline. "But this, it's tearing me apart." Elias gripped the phone, heart pounding. "Fight for us. Please." Wyatt's agreement was a vow, but as the call ended, Elias sank to the floor, tears hot on his cheeks, knowing the real storm was just beginning. One that would demand everything or nothing at all. Lubbock baked under a relentless July sun, the air shimmering like a mirage over asphalt that stretched to eternity. Wyatt had arrived 3 days prior, the Mustang's tires humming a dirge on I-20, each mile marker a countdown to confrontation. Lila's trailer squatted on the outskirts, a double-wide with peeling siding and a swing set rusting in the yard. Jake's last gift, bought online before shipping out. She greeted him at the door, belly round as a harvest moon, dark hair pulled into a ponytail that did little to hide the exhaustion etching her young face. "Wyatt," she said, hugging him fierce despite the bump between them. "He'd be proud you're here." Proud. The word twisted because Jake would have seen through the cracks. The brother who'd dismissed his confession, who'd let fear build the walls that now threatened to bury Wyatt alive. Lila led him inside, the space cramped with baby gear. Stacks of onesies, a crib half-assembled in the corner. She brewed iced tea strong as tar, settling onto the sagging couch with a sigh. "Braxton Hicks all mornin'. Doc says it's stress." Her eyes, so like Jake's, hazel and haunted, pinned him. "And you? Look like you seen a ghost." Wyatt sipped the tea, the cold bite grounding him. "Something like that," he told her then, haltingly. The kiss, Elias, the voicemail folly that had spiraled into this exile. Lila listened without judgment, hand absently rubbing her belly, the baby's kicks a rhythmic underscore. "Love's messy, Wyatt Harlan," she said when he finished, voice soft but sure. "Jake knew that. He loved you anyway. flaws and all. The words pierced, a bomb and a blade, stirring memories of boyhood forts and shared secrets, the bond unbreakable until Wyatt's denial cracked it. Pa's call had come that first night, Lila's phone on speaker as Harlan Sr.'s tirade filled the trailer like smoke. "What the hell's this I hear? You shacked up with a man? After everything. Your brother dying for this country. And you spit on it like some pervert." The venom was vintage, laced with scripture and small-town scorn, but beneath lurked fear, the old man's world shrinking, son by son. Wyatt had endured it, voice steady. "I love him, Pa ain't changing that." The line had gone dead, but the fallout rippled. Aunts whispering, cousins ghosting. The church potluck invite rescinded like a slap. Lila became his ally, fierce and unflinching, driving him to Lamaze classes in her battered Civic, coaching breaths while he wrestled demons. "Breathe through it," she'd say, mimicking contractions, her laugh turning the trailer into sanctuary. In quiet moments, she'd share Jake's letters, postcards from Basic, folded notes from Downtime, words of love for her, pride in Wyatt, a quiet ache for the truth he'd buried. "He wanted you to be happy?" Lila murmured one evening, as cicadas chorused outside, fireflies winking like stars fallen low. "Don't let fear steal that from you." Fear. It clung like humidity, thickening as Wyatt helped paint the nursery. Soft blue walls, a mural of prairies and pickup trucks, Jake's world rendered in broad strokes. His hands shook on the roller, paint flecking his arms, mind replaying Elias's voice on those late-night calls. "I need you here." Wyatt sent photos, Lila beaming, the crib complete, captioned with "soon." But the word felt hollow, the distance a growing rift. Back in Seattle, Elias navigated the void with mechanical grace, days bleeding into nights of freelance gigs and bar crawls with Lena's crew, drag brunches at Julia's, where queens lip-synced to Ariana and the mimosas flowed like absolution. Devin circled back, tentative texts evolving to coffee, his presence a distraction that dulled the edge of longing. "He's figuring his shit out," Devin said over pastries, his foot nudging Elias's under the table. "But you're allowed to live." Elias nodded, but the touch felt wrong, a placeholder for the man whose drawl haunted his dreams. The breaking came via email, Wyatt's subject line stark, "Truth." Inside, a scan of Jake's letter, the one Lila had kept hidden. The confession in faded ink, "Wyatt, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But no, I loved a man once, fierce as any woman. Don't hate yourself for the same. Be free, brother." Elias read it curled on the fire escape, tears blurring the words, the gift of bridge across miles and misunderstandings. He called Wyatt immediately, the line connecting with a click that echoed like fate. "I got it," Elias said, voice thick. "Jake." He knew. Wyatt's exhale was ragged, background noise of crickets and Lila's humming faint. "Yeah, makes it real, don't it?" They talked until battery died, plans for Wyatt's return, a future sketch tentative, couples counseling in Capitol Hill, pride parades hand in hand. "I choose you," Wyatt vowed, the words a seal, "every damn time." But Lubbock wasn't done extracting its toll. The night before Wyatt's departure, Pa showed at the trailer unannounced, truck idling in the drive like a getaway plan. Harlan Sr. was a monolith, 6'4", weathered as fence posts, eyes red-rimmed under the brim of his Stetson. "Boy," he growled, blocking the door, Lila hovering protective in the kitchen. Wyatt faced him on the porch, the swing creaking under their weight as words flew like buckshot. "You think this city's turned you soft? That fairy boy's poison, Wyatt. Come home. Straighten up. Lila needs an uncle, not a shame." The old man's hand clamped Wyatt's knee, grip iron, but Wyatt shook it off, standing tall. "Shame's what you taught me. Pa hatin' myself, hatin' Jake for being honest. But I'm done. Elias ain't poison, he's life. And this baby, I'll be here, but on my terms." Pa's face crumpled, not in anger, but defeat, the crack of a lifetime's armor. "Your ma." She'd weep. Wyatt knelt then, eye level. Or she'd hug me tighter. Love don't bend to rules, Pa. It breaks him. The elder Harlan left without another word, tail lights fading into dust. But the seed was planted. Days later, as Wyatt hugged Lila goodbye, her tears on his shirt, the baby kicking farewell, a letter arrived, Pa's scrawl. Blood's thicker, but so's grace. Bring him next time. Wyatt folded it careful, tucking it beside Jake's, the weight lifting like monsoon clouds parting. He drove north through dawns and dusks, the Mustang eating highway, heart light for the first time in weeks. Seattle welcomed him with drizzle and the Space Needle's glow. Home a beacon. Elias waited on the stoop, sketchpad under arm, smile breaking wide as Wyatt pulled up. They collided in the street, kiss salt-streaked and sun-warmed, neighbors' curtains twitching but ignored. Inside, over takeout ribs and sushi, they rebuilt. Stories swapped, hands intertwined, the future a canvas blank and inviting. Wyatt hung the sketches proudly, Elias's talent a testament, and when night fell, they tangled slow, learning bodies like sacred text. I love you, Wyatt murmured into Elias's neck, the words free now, unburdened. Months unfolded in rhythm. Wyatt at the shop, Elias's designs gracing billboards. Weekends hiking the Cascades, hands linked on trails dappled sun. Pride came vibrant, rainbows reclaiming streets, Wyatt's arm around Elias's waist as floats rolled, his voice joining chants unashamed. Lila visited in fall, baby boy in arms, named Jacob Elias, a bridge of names. The trailer tales swapped over coffee, Pa's calls tentative but thawing. Yet scars lingered, reminders of the cost. Wyatt's flinches at old jokes, Elias's guarded heart mending slow. But in the quiet, as rain pattered eternal, they found grace. In laughter shared, touches tender, the choice renewed daily. Love, they learned, wasn't a cage but a key, unlocking worlds once apart, now entwined in the gray-blue heart of the city that had claimed them both.